Right now, in the blood moving through your arm, there is a molecule that nobody was looking for. It has no name you'd recognize. It has never appeared on any blood panel you've been given. Your doctor almost certainly has not mentioned it, and if you asked about it this afternoon, there's a fair chance they'd have to look it up. But across studies covering more than 3,000 people, the ones carrying the most of it were roughly twice as likely to have a heart attack or a stroke as the ones carrying the least, twice. And that gap survived every adjustment of the researchers could throw at it. Cholesterol, blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, every single risk factor cardiology's been chasing for 50 years. Then they ran the experiment that turns a statistic into something you can actually watch. They took that molecule at the exact concentration you find in ordinary human blood, and they put it on the living lining of a blood vessel. The vessel changed. You need one image in your head for the rest of this to land. The inside of a healthy artery is not a rough pipe. It's coated with a single layer of cells, and in its normal state, that layer behaves like a non-stick surface. Blood cells slide past it constantly, millions of times an hour, without catching on anything. Under the influence of this molecule, that surface stopped being slippery, and then they did it inside a living animal, using a technique that lets you watch blood moving through a real vessel in real time, and they saw immune cells that should have been gliding straight past begin to catch, slow, stop, grip the wall. Here's the part that stopped the research team cold. That molecule is not a toxin. It isn't a pollutant or a microplastic or something leaching out of a scratch pan. It is what is left over after your body finishes breaking down a vitamin that is added to bread by law, a vitamin sitting in most multivitamins on the shelf behind you, a vitamin that doctors spent half a century actively prescribing in enormous doses to protect people's hearts. The vitamin is niacin, vitamin B3, and if your first instinct is to shrug, stay with me, because that shrug is the entire problem. Niacin isn't some fringe powder sold by a guy on a podcast. It is one of the most deeply embedded compounds in the modern food supply. It has been in your flour since before your grandparents were born. It's in your cereal, your energy drink, your protein bar, your multivitamin. You did not choose most of your exposure to it. It was chosen for you 80 years ago, for a reason that was genuinely good. Now here is the twist that took 80 years to surface, and it's the thing almost everyone gets wrong when they first hear about this. The vitamin is not the villain here. Your body can only use so much niacin. Whatever is left over, it has to get rid of, and it can't just dump it out unchanged. It has to chemically break it down first through a series of steps into a final product simple enough to eliminate. That final product, the chemical ash at the very end of the line, after your body is completely finished with vitamin B3, is called 4-PY. CPY is what doubled the risk. 4-PY is what made the vessel sticky, which means the thing that matters isn't whether you take niacin. Almost everybody does. It's how much your body is being handed above what it can actually use. And that leads to the single most important idea in this entire story. The researcher behind this work describes niacin intake as multiple taps pouring into one bucket, not one source. Many fortified flour is a tap, fortified cereal is a tap, energy drinks are a tap, and they're often loaded far past what you get from a meal. Protein bars and meal replacement shakes are a tap. A daily multivitamin is a tap. A dedicated B complex on top of that is a bigger tap. And a high-dose niacin supplement is a fire hose. Every individual product sits inside its own legal limits. Every label is compliant. Nobody is watching the bucket. Nobody adds them up. Not the manufacturers, not the regulators, and almost certainly not you. In the Cleveland Clinic cohorts, roughly 1 in 4 people appeared to be getting more than they could use, with the elevated 4-PY levels to prove it. 1 in 4. That is not a rare metabolic quirk. That is the person sitting next to you. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you 3 things, what the evidence actually proves, and, just as importantly, what it doesn't. Exactly what this molecule does to the wall of a blood vessel. Because the specific mechanism is what makes this hard to dismiss. And then the one corner of the supplement aisle where this lands so hard it becomes almost darkly funny. a category millions of people are currently paying premium prices for, specifically to protect their hearts. But first you have to understand why nobody caught this sooner, because that story is the reason this molecule sat in plain sight for 80 years. Go back to the American South in the early 1900s. A plague sweeps through. People develop scaling, sunburn-like rashes across their hands and necks, then relentless diarrhea, then confusion, memory loss, hallucinations. Asylum wards fill with patients who are not mentally ill at all. Tens of thousands die. Doctors are convinced it's an infection because it moves through crowded villages and poor households exactly the way an infection does. It wasn't an infection. It was pellagra, and it was caused by a shortage of niacin because the region lived on corn, and corn locks its niacin in a form the human body cannot absorb. Once that was understood, governments moved with a speed that's genuinely hard to imagine today. Around the Second World War, fortifying staple foods with niacin was mandated. Flour, cereal, oats, a disease that had killed and institutionalized enormous numbers of people, effectively vanished. It remains one of the great public health victories, and nothing in this video takes that away from it. But that decision had a consequence nobody could have modeled at the time. Niacin stopped being something you might run short of and became something almost impossible to avoid. Then came the second act, and this is where it gets uncomfortable. By the 1970s and 80s, cardiology had fallen in love with HDL, the so-called good cholesterol. The logic seemed unarguable. People with high HDL had fewer heart attacks. So raising HDL should prevent heart attacks, and there was one cheap compound that raised HDL better than almost anything on the shelf. Niacin. At high doses, it moved every number beautifully. HDL up, triglycerides down, LDL down. On paper, it looked like a miracle in a cheap yellow tablet. So they prescribed it widely for decades, often stacked on top of statins, to millions of people, at doses hundreds of times higher than anything you'd ever get from food. Patients endured a side effect called the niacin flush, a burning red wave of heat across the face and chest that can last half an hour, because they'd been told it was the price of a longer life. And then somebody finally ran the trial that was supposed to prove it worked. In 2011, a study called AAM-HI tested extended-release niacin in more than 3,000 patients who already had cardiovascular disease. It was stopped early, not because the results were spectacular, because niacin wasn't helping. The lab reports improved, the heart attacks and strokes did not. Defenders said the trial was too small, badly designed, unlucky, so they ran a bigger one. HPS-R-Thrive enrolled 25,673 patients. It is still the largest niacin trial ever conducted, 4 years of follow-up. And it didn't just fail to show a benefit. It showed a signal of harm. More new onset diabetes, worse blood sugar control in people who already had it, more serious problems in the gut, the muscles, the skin. Merck pulled its niacin product from markets worldwide. The National Lipid Association told doctors to curtail routine use. Cardiology quietly closed the book. The explanation everyone settled on was simple and comforting. Raising HDL just doesn't help. So niacin had never really been doing anything at all. Sit with that for a second, because there's a hole in it big enough to drive a truck through. It doesn't work and it causes harm, are not the same finding. A drug that does nothing should not produce a signal of harm in 25,000 people. Something else was happening in those trials, and the field concluded the theory was wrong and moved on without ever asking why there were bodies on the other side of the ledger. It took another 11 years for anyone to go looking. At the Cleveland Clinic, a researcher named Stanley Hazen had spent years chasing what cardiologists call residual risk. It's the uncomfortable open question at the center of the entire field. You can put a patient on a statin, control their blood pressure, get them to quit smoking, hit every guideline target perfectly, and a substantial number of them still have heart attacks. Something is driving that risk. Nobody knows what. So Hazen's team did something different. Instead of measuring the handful of things cardiologists already suspected, they took fasting blood from more than 1,000 stable cardiac patients and ran what's called untargeted metabolomics. That means measure everything, every small molecule in the plasma, no hypothesis at all, then see which ones track with who goes on to have a heart attack or a stroke over the following years. They weren't looking for niacin. They weren't looking for anything. The signal that came back pointed straight at niacin metabolism, specifically at the terminal breakdown products, the end of the line. They validated it in a second. Completely separate group of 2,331 American patients using far more precise measurement. Same result. Then in a European cohort in Berlin. Same result again. People in the highest quartile of 4PY had roughly double the rate of major cardiac events compared with the lowest quartile, independent of every traditional risk factor. Now, if you have any statistical instincts at all, you already know what's wrong with everything I've just said. This is an association. Sick people have different blood chemistry than healthy people for 100 boring reasons. Maybe 4PY is just a marker, a passenger, smoke from somebody else's fire. That objection is correct. It is the right thing to ask, and it is exactly why what comes next is the part that changes how you read a label. Quick thing before I get to it. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, the single most useful thing you can do is subscribe, because that's what tells the algorithm to put this in front of the people who need it. That's it. Now let me show you what they found. Start with the vessel wall again. That non-stick lining is not passively slippery. Your body maintains that slipperiness on purpose, and your body can switch it off on purpose. When there's a real injury or a real infection, the cells lining your vessels push a protein to their surface called VCAM1. Think of VCAM1 as Velcro. Once it's displayed, immune cells stop sliding and start gripping. They catch on the wall, roll to a halt, and burrow underneath it. That is a normal, useful, life-saving defense mechanism when there's an actual threat to deal with. It is also, when it happens over and over again with no real threat, the first physical step in building arterial plaque. Chronic vascular inflammation isn't a vague wellness phrase. This is the machinery. So the team applied 4PY to vascular cells at levels you find in real human blood. VCAM1 switched on. Then they did it in living animals and watched it happen in real time. And here are the two details that make this very hard to wave away as noise. There are two of these terminal breakdown products, 2PY and 4PY. Both were associated with cardiac risk in the human data. But in the mechanistic experiments, only 4PY drove the inflammation. 2PY, the chemically almost a twin, did not. That kind of specificity is extremely difficult to get by accident. Random confounding doesn't usually know how to tell two nearly identical molecules apart. And then the second detail, which is the one that really closes the door, the team found a genetic variation that influences how much 4PY a person carries in their blood. And that same genetic variation tracked with the rate of cardiac events. Think about why that matters. Your genes were assigned at conception decades before your diet, your habits, your income, or your illness had any say. A lifestyle factor can't reach backward in time and edit them. So when a gene that raises your 4PY also raises your event rate, the "it's just a passenger" explanation gets very thin. It's worth being concrete about what this stickiness actually leads to, because vascular inflammation slides right past most people. A heart attack is usually not a pipe slowly clogging until nothing fits through. That's the cartoon version, and it's wrong. What normally happens is that immune cells got underneath the vessel lining years earlier, filled with fat, and formed a soft pocket sitting under a thin, fibrous cap. Then one day that cap tears. Your body sees the tear the way it sees any cut, and does the only thing it knows how to do to a cut. It forms a clot. And the clot, not the plaque, closes the artery in minutes. Every single stage of that begins with an immune cell that should have slid past and didn't, which is why a molecule that switches on the exact protein that makes them stop is not a minor biochemical curiosity. It's an input at the very start of the chain. Now let's go to that corner of the supplement world I promised you, because the irony here is almost too neat to be real. For the last several years, the hottest category in longevity supplements has been NAD boosters, NMN, nicotinamide riboside products promising to reverse cellular aging, restore energy, repair your DNA, sold by celebrity biohackers, frequently very expensive. NAD itself is genuinely important. It's a coenzyme central to energy metabolism, and levels really do decline with age. That part isn't hype, but look at what these compounds actually are. NMN and nicotinamide riboside are forms of vitamin B3. They are niacin precursors. They feed the exact same pathway that produces 4-PY. Independent testing organizations have pointed out that most NMN products deliver niacin equivalents that would normally exceed tolerable upper limits, and the researchers themselves explicitly called for further investigation into the link between niacin and NAD supplementation, poor PY, and cardiovascular disease. So a large number of people are voluntarily paying premium prices to pour an extra tap into a bucket that a quarter of the population may already be overfilling, in the name of protecting their cardiovascular health. And the darkly funny footnote: when third-party labs tested these products, a large majority of nicotinamide riboside supplements contained far less than the label claimed. Some contained almost none at all, alongside outright counterfeits, which means that for a meaningful number of buyers, the most protective feature of the product may have been that it didn't work. Before you go throw anything out, I want to attack the belief that lets most people ignore all of this, because almost everyone holds it. You've probably heard that B vitamins are water-soluble, so any excess is harmless. You just urinate it out. That is not what happens. Your body does not flush surplus niacin out unchanged like water through a sieve. It processes it, it methylates it, breaks it down, and converts it into the terminal products it's able to eliminate. The excess is not ignored. It is metabolized. And the finished product of that metabolism, in the highest quartile, is what tracked with double the cardiac event rate. You just pee out the extra, quietly skips the step where your liver has to do something to it first. Now I need to be straight with you about what this evidence does not establish, because there's a version of this video that would be irresponsible, and the honesty is the thing that makes the rest of it worth acting on. The human data is observational. It shows association in patients who are already undergoing cardiac evaluation, not in the general healthy population. The mechanism was demonstrated in cells and in animals. It has not been proven in humans. The study authors themselves say long-term investigation is needed to understand what chronic elevation of 4-PY actually does across a lifetime. What you have here is a strong, well-replicated, mechanistically supported hypothesis with real genetic support behind it. It is not a closed case, and anyone telling you it is selling something. Niacin is also essential. You need it. Pellagra was real, and it really killed people, and fortification really stopped it. The answer to this research is not to go hunting for unfortified flour and give yourself a deficiency in order to avoid a metabolite. And if you have been prescribed niacin by a doctor for familial hypercholesterolemia, severe hypertriglyceridemia, statin intolerance, and then somebody measured everything instead of measuring what they expected and found a molecule at the end of a pathway nobody was watching, sitting quietly in the blood of 1 in 4 people, making the inside of their vessels sticky. That's the thing about this kind of damage. There is no symptom, no flush, no pain, no warning sign. It is a single layer of cells losing their slipperiness over years until one day a plaque that had been building silently decides to tear. You cannot feel it happening. That is precisely why it's worth knowing about. So go read the labels on everything in that cabinet. Add up the real number. And if the total surprises you, take it to your doctor rather than to a comment section. And then watch the video on your screen right now, because there is another supplement sitting in millions of medicine cabinets with a story just as strange as this one. I'm your health guider. Thanks for watching.